Hello everybody, this is Tekka. In this video, what we are going to be doing is taking a look at Fedora and Arch Linux, specifically some of the main differences between them, as Fedora and some Arch-based Linux systems seem to be where I end up when it comes to trying to pick out a Linux distribution. So both Fedora and Arch Linux are generally considered cutting-edge distributions, so all the packages are up to date in comparison to something like Debian. However, the way in which they achieve this is different. So on both, you'll be getting the latest versions of your preferred desktop environment, the latest kernels, and the latest versions of your favorite applications and more. So with that, let's talk about their update structures. Arch is a rolling release Linux distribution, which means that you install it once and then you keep updating individual packages on your system. There's no Arch Linux version 2 that you need to install 6 months later. So you just install Arch and update your system as need be. Fedora, on the other hand, is a fixed release distribution. Fedora currently has a release cycle of around 6 months, and this means every 6 months you'll need to upgrade to the latest version of Fedora. Now, while Arch is somewhat more convenient because you don't need to do full system-wide updates in a certain period of time, it can cause issues when Arch decides to make a system-breaking change, in which an update will require manual intervention to fix, and the system will be less stable overall compared to Fedora. Now, this may sound bad, but I've only really had one occasion where I had boot issues after an update, and I think it had something to do with the NVIDIA drivers on Manjaro. Fedora's frequent update cycle is what allows it to be cutting edge while still being stable enough for even a Linux novice to use comfortably. For example, a potentially system-breaking change would just wait until the next major version of Fedora is ready, so that way any bugs can be worked out and fixed. We even saw this in the last 36 update, as its release date was pushed forward a few times as bugs were eliminated. Now let's talk about the backing for these distributions, just like how OnlyOffice backed and sponsored this video. OnlyOffice is a fantastic all-in-one office suite fully compatible with Microsoft Office. Within a single application, they have a full-featured word processing, presentation, and spreadsheet application. Just in this latest release, they added an integrated PDF viewer and conversion tool, as well as many more major updates and changes. I've been using OnlyOffice on Windows, Linux, and even in the cloud within my Nextcloud instance for this YouTube channel. In addition to their free and open source desktop applications, they have online document servers and workspace tools with free community versions. So head down to the description, download OnlyOffice on any platform, and if you are using Linux, you have options for all of the major packaging formats, including Snap, Flatpak, whatever you really want to use. Now with that, Arch and Fedora are both community projects. However, Fedora is funded by Red Hat and therefore shares some infrastructure and ties. This can be noticeable in some places. For example, doing a bug report takes you to the Red Hat Bugzilla page, which requires its own account. In return, Red Hat bases itself off of Fedora, which essentially makes Red Hat the LTS version of Fedora. Arch, on the other hand, is a fully independent community project with no corporate ties. So from there, package management is where, in my opinion, Arch starts to pull off some wins. Fedora and Arch currently use different package managers, with Arch using Pacman and Fedora using DNF. Pacman is known for being somewhat confusing to new Arch users. For example, instead of running pacman install Firefox, you would do pacman-syu Firefox, with the S installing it, Y updating the repositories, and U updating the installed packages. DNF is a little bit easier to use. For example, you simply just run DNF install Firefox, and it even automatically updates your repositories, for which it'll save you some work. So like with Ubuntu, you would have to run sudo apt update and then update your packages with upgrade. On Fedora, that's not the case. And this also makes sure that your dependencies are up to date, which prevents weird dependency issues that you can get on Arch if you do not keep up to date or keep your system up to date. However, DNF is known to be one of the slowest package managers, which is a huge con not only for DNF, but for Fedora as a whole. And I did talk about this a lot more in my Fedora specific review, so make sure you go check out that video. Speaking of packages, let's talk about these distribution repositories. Fedora has two, one being the main one and two being for updates. Arch is a bit more complicated with several different repos, including core, extra community, multi-lib, staging, and testing repos. According to pkgs.org, Fedora's main repo alone has almost 68,000 packages, which actually beats out Ubuntu by around 2,000 packages, making Fedora's repo one of the biggest of any distro. The Fedora repo, however, only ships with free and open source packages, and they even avoid open source things that could be considered a legal risk for Fedora, such as emulators. So you most likely will need to install some other repo like RPM Fusion to get around this limitation. Now for Arch, their repos are somewhat small, with just under 13,000 packages in its non-staging and testing repos. This is very small, even compared to something like Void Linux, which has a bigger repository with just over 18,000 packages, including their non-free repos. To get around this, Arch has the AUR, or one of my favorite things, the Arch User Repository. It is a giant repo of unofficial user-generated package, and these can vary in quality, but generally there is an AUR package for almost everything that you can think of. For example, the AMD Pro drivers that are made specifically for Ubuntu will actually give you better success installing them on Arch through the AUR with less steps and limited configuration needed. Now, Fedora does have something similar to the AUR called Copper, which allows anybody to easily make their own RPMs and maintain them. Not just for Fedora, but several other distros, including Red Hat Linux and even OpenSUSE. The main issue, though, this is very similar to the PPA system in Ubuntu, which means you may find yourself having several extra repos installed with Copper. Now, lastly, let's talk about the installation. Fedora uses the Anaconda installer, which has gotten criticism for being somewhat confusing. The main install process is straightforward enough, but the general layout is just not common compared to other installation processes or applications such as Calamaris. Now, with that, Arch, on the other hand, makes Fedora look like you are installing Chrome. Until recently, they didn't even have an installer, and you would just have to go to the Arch wiki and install it step by step for yourself. This changed on April Fools of 2021 with the introduction of Arch Install. This is a TUI script to help you install and set up Arch, and it can still be a bit confusing, which there are several other Arch scripts, such as ArchFi available, which again, I have a video on that too if you want to see my ArchFi guide. But in addition to that, there are a whole bunch of Linux distributions that will make installing Arch easier, such as the Arch GUI, EndeavourOS, and because of this, if you're a beginner, I generally recommend installing something easier that provides the benefit of Arch like EndeavourOS or even Manjaro. So that is my comparison of Fedora and Arch Linux. For you and your specific use case, you might have a preference, one preference over the other. If there is something in the AUR that you must absolutely have, Arch might be your best bet. For my case, I generally prefer Fedora, as I like the default GNOME desktop. It's clean, I love it, and everything just seems to work perfectly. And I did mention cons with DNF earlier in this video. If you're interested in trying out Fedora, I recommend you check out the video I made going over the steps to do after you install Fedora. And below I'll be linking to some other resources and previous videos that I've done on very similar subjects if you want to do a little bit more digging and research. With all that, big thank you to our YouTube members and Patreon supporters. You guys are fantastic. Thank you to OnlyOffice for sponsoring this video. I love it when some free and open source software can be a sponsor. You guys are fantastic. And thank you for watching. If you like it, give it a like. If you didn't, dislike it. There'll be a text version of this video linked down below. So with all that, I hope you have an absolutely beautiful day and goodbye.